Okay. The recording is in progress. Okay, I get to read this statement all the time. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this Zoom call do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Okay? I'm practicing, such statements. Hi, everybody. It's good to see a big crowd here. Announcements. Those of you who are, who want to drive to Atlanta, Wildcats being shown at the Terra Theater in Atlanta on Friday.
Tomorrow, free.
That's tomorrow, yes.
Yeah, I'll be there.
You'll be there. Okay, you'll give us a report. And let's see, those of you in the area, we're having a poetry reading by Lauren Newburn and Alice Fryman, May the 14th at Blackbird Coffee. And oh, by the way, some of you have sent me proposals for the conference, but those of you who have not, keep in mind, May the 15th is the deadline for sending in proposals for the O'Connor conference we're hosting this September. And I hope to hear from a lot of you. Okay. That's all my announcements, unless somebody can think of something else. Introductions. Okay, I'm going to introduce both of our speakers briefly. They're both veterans of the NEH Summer Institute, Reconsidering Flannery O'Connor from June 2023. Do you realize it's been almost a year? And they're here to talk about what they were thinking about and what they've been thinking about in the year since the Summer Institute, okay? On the subject of Flannery O'Connor and Andalusia. Our first speaker is going to be Ashley Massey, who holds an MA in literature and writes academically in the fields of Southern Gothic literature and critical prison studies. She teaches writing and literature courses in jails and prisons, including through the University of North Alabama's Restorative Justice Lab. She works on a farm in Middle Tennessee, where she is a small business owner, cattle caretaker, and community organizer. Her poetry has appeared in numerous small presses, and she recently released a Gothic farm-themed poetry book, Keep the Gate Open. Our second speaker, Timothy Vande Brake, is professor of English and the academic director of language and literature at Roberts Wesleyan University. He holds a PhD in English from the University of Alabama. His research focuses on environment and ethics in American and African literatures, and he has published on writers such as Wole Soyinka and on Flannery O'Connor in journals such as Christianity and Literature, The Comparatist, and the Flannery O'Connor Review. This is going to be a good evening. We are going to make sure we monitor the chat. If you have comments, questions, I'll ask you to hold them for the end, and you may go ahead and post them in the chat so that I'll know they're coming. But we should have time at the end for, a fair amount of discussion and follow-up. So with that, I will ask Ashley Massey to unmute and take it away, Ashley.
Hey,
Ashley,
yes.
I gave you sharing permission, so you can share your slide.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. It's great to be back in community with you all. We were talking about the rough weather earlier, so I do want to preface in saying that we had some rough weather here in Tennessee this morning, last night, and our farm was hit by tornadic winds for the 4th time this year. So that is what I'm coming off of today. That is my energy. Everything is okay. We were super fortunate, but I did not get as far on my slides as I would have liked because we were cleaning up and moving a big tree so my mom could leave the house. So that's where I'm coming from.
Excuses.
Yeah, it is on the farm.
Tornado.
Yeah. very on theme. So, and also I've been kind of focused more on like a critical prison studies paper on O'Connor. So like looking at carceral spaces, and that's coming up. I'll be presenting that at Sizzle at the Southern Literature Conference. So I've kind of been in that mindset of preparing for that. And I'm like switching back to this. I did get accepted to present on this topic at an upcoming international Gothic conference in Canada. Fingers crossed I can swing it because I am contingent faculty. So funding is, that's always fun to figure out. But this is kind of what I'm working on for that conference. It's very much a living document still. So I kind of, when I first was at the NEH, I was thinking of doing more of a like autoethnography kind of take on the farm as a Gothic setting and women on the farm and like my own experience. Now I'm just kind of going more into the Gothic setting and also doing comparisons between like mid-century literary portrayals of farm to modern day and looking at these modern day kind of portrayals that are a little more distorted because of social media. So yeah, and of course my work is really grounded in work that predates me, has come before. Dr. Monica Miller's Farm Women essay is wonderful. Dr. Carol Sloss, the seminars at the NEH Institute were really informative in kind of getting me here as well. So I will, let's see. So where do I go to share? Sorry, it's been a minute. I've been using Google. Let's see. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and start. 'Cause it's really
You should have a share button and like right in the middle of the like little toolbar at the bottom.
Oh yeah, okay, gotcha. The bright green thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So again, it's very brief, but these are my cows on film so sharing that, and I felt like it was Gothic looking in black and white, little creepy cows. But I argue that in Southern Gothic literature, the farm can function as a character itself, kind of creating and fueling anxieties for the farm's owners and the workers who've been kind of caught in this mid-century to current shift of capitalist production and consumption that favors and empowers corporate farms over small family-run farms, and also kind of exiles former farmers to cities for labor and income generation. And I think these anxieties manifest well in O'Connor's work, especially through the women who hold these positions of power on the farm, also through their employees, their community members who feel this shift, and some welcome it, some resent it, and also their children who must kind of choose to inherit these anxieties or seek refuge in the city's kind of capitalist kind of circus. So such transferences from idle to isolation for its women characters, I think, are most prominent in the following short stories, but also these short stories are kind of my favorite, so that's why I focused on them. But Greenleaf, A Circle in the Fire, and A View of the Woods. So the woman dwelling and at times disintegrating in O'Connor's Southern Gothic fictional farmland, I believe, are kind of cracked mirrors, of course, to her own life on the farm with her mother, Regina, in Milledgeville. And the farm setting in these short stories paradoxically demands its inhabitants to live in a place that is both familiar but also strange. So in O'Connor's work, this once idyllic place can transform into kind of an incubator of exile. And for the women and all their identities, the farm has a tightened grip, holding them back to this place and to themselves. And the fear that is inherent in, of course, the Gothic text, it manifests in many ways in these farm settings as fear of intrusion, disruption, removal, and loss. And I believe echoes challenges women face in O'Connor's time, but also currently in real and surreal rural Southern settings. So I make the argument that the farm is up there with other Gothic settings like castles, graveyards, dilapidated mansions, and looking at what Gothic elements are present. So looking at, of course, bad weather, and thinking of that, I'm looking at like A Circle in the Fire, where literally the first line is setting up what the weather is. What is the sky looking? And there's this really foreboding sentence of this solid gray blue wall, a little darker than the sky, but this afternoon it was almost black. And behind it, the sky was a livid, glaring white. So that is setting the scene already. Different kinds of decay. whether it be structures on the farm, the setting, the actual physical setting, or the decay, breakdown in the society connections. And again, this overwhelming kind of foreboding dread that you feel while reading some of these stories. So kind of look, and then of course the theme I'm looking at is intrusion, disruption, loss, and isolation in these women's lives on the farm. Then looking forward to further exploration, I'm still working this out, connecting to the modern day, but I'm really interested in these current themes that we're seeing play out on social media, especially with these trends towards homesteading, and how they're kind of portraying these idealistic versions of farms. So I think we're in a kind of similar time of shifting. And it's been co-opted, I believe, this homesteading, like returning to the land, returning to farming, by far right movements. And I think these two shifts from mid-century and Flannery's time to people having to leave the farm to now people wanting to return, I think these two shifts speak to each other. And I want to look further into that shift. And I think for Flannery, she offered a more realistic, of course, portrayal of farm life for women. But now on social media, what we are seeing is a really traditional, highly curated, and idealistic portrayal of farm life for women. So one influencer in particular that comes up is Ballerina Farms, if anyone has heard of her. She offers a very glossed over, a very privileged stance of farm life. I think her husband is like, his dad is over Boeing, like, don't quote me on that. So yeah, a lot of privilege, very glossed over, very, very hyper traditional, making everything from scratch, raising a bunch of kids, not having, but everything just looking very, like glossy, very filtered. I think it's really important to pay attention to this shift, especially following, the Roe v. Wade. I just think it's so important to pay attention to why this kind of more traditional ideal is being pushed forward. I think one reason for this shift of people returning to the land and wanting to buy farms has been fueled by COVID. So you have more people being able to leave the cities. They're being able to do remote work because of the pandemic. Also because of apprehensions with and misinformation about vaccinations, medical freedom, and also with public schools versus homeschooling and all that's going on with that. So I think that's kind of informing this shift as well. It's confusing because at the same time, it's a conundrum because at the same time people are wanting to return, you also have these out of state and even out of country developers who are actively destroying farmland in these communities to put up a lot of times housing, quick housing, like apartments and condos. They're creating their own secluded communities right outside of cities who have exhausted their housing resources. And then they name the developments and the roads after the farms and after the trees and the plants that they removed and disrupted and destroyed. So I think multiple realities, of course, can exist, but it's just kind of confusing when you have so many people seeking land to kind of have this return to the earth, this homestead, but at the same time, that land is being destroyed. But looking in a more like positive kind of way, there are people who are carving out space for an alternative. So I put some of those creators there who are kind of changing the narrative. So Tori is my friend from Cedar Hill Homestead. She's based in Tennessee. She's all about recognizing the land, its history, indigenous cultures, indigenous medicine, kind of using medicinal plants, also, being very aware of the plants you're taking, not taking too much, kind of repopulating native species, native plants. So trying to use the land and preserve it in more ethical and sustainable ways. So she's someone who's kind of carving out her own space there. Also, there's Native Habitat Project. He is a guy, he's from Huntsville, which isn't far from me. So he posts a lot of content about these developers who are coming in and they're destroying these really rare plants, disrupting them. So he kind of brings awareness to that as well. And I feel like in a way, I'm also carving out my own space. I'm, doing similar work in shaping the future of my family's farm. So I am the main caretaker of that space after my dad passed away in 2021. And I just see a lot. That's why I wanted to go in the more autoethnography way at first. I think maybe one day I'll get there because I do see a lot of my own reflections in the farm women, and just the struggles, the sexism, and everything that's come to play, especially in the most recent years. Literally last week, because I'm going through kind of a shift, and I was at a job interview, and the other candidate who was being interviewed, she knew I had a farm or whatever, and she said, so who actually does the work on the farm? And this coming from another woman, was just kind of like, really, like, we're going through this again. And I was like, me. But yeah, so I think for me personally, after my family, after my animals, the most important thing in my life is the farm, is preserving it, is protecting it, protecting the land. I wanted to kind of end, I'm still moving through resources that I found on farm women and the Gothic. This one I have not read all the way yet, but it's a treasury of farm women's humor. And I got it because I don't know if y'all can see the bull, it looks like Mrs. Greenleaf and the Greenleaf bull like chasing after her. And I'm like, I don't know if there's a connection there. But I wanted to end with this little excerpt at the beginning that says, a ranch woman knows what she shouldn't do and several things that she wouldn't do. But by gosh, to her credit, though she never has said it, there really ain't much that she couldn't do. So, and I'm going to end with my little cows too. So thank y'all. Stop.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.
Now let's see. There's the end of slideshow.
Sorry.
Exit.
Am I like totally missing? Oh, okay. There you go.
There we go. Well, there's still a slideshow there.
Okay. Did someone pause me? Sorry. I'm not. Okay. I got it.
There we go. That looks like
I am not of my generation, y'all, in technology. I'm on the farm with bad internet.
Farm. Okay. Thank you very much, Ashley. We will now turn it right over to Tim Vande Brake. Unmute yourself, Tim, and go for it.
Thank you, Ashley, for sharing those pictures of your farm. They're really beautiful, and what a wonderful place. I'm so glad to hear too that there wasn't a whole lot of damage, it sounds like, from the winds, but it sounds like a tree down. Ashley is a real farmer. I'm just a farmer in my imagination. So, but I was splitting wood today, so maybe that counts a little bit. Okay, so here's my paper on, you'll see here in just a second. In this talk, I'll focus on 3 moments of discovery in my research about Flannery O'Connor and Andalusia Farm. These moments span more than a decade. Thus, this will be less an argument and more a relation of spots of time through which my understanding of O'Connor and my respect for her work have been broadened and deepened. I've labeled these 3 moments the land, the ledger, and the lens. Part 1, the land. I grew up in Georgia, specifically near Atlanta and Rome, but I'd never been to Milledgeville until well into my adulthood. In 2010, I was giving a paper at an American Literature Association symposium in Savannah. The only affordable flights from my point of departure, Rochester, New York, landed in Atlanta. So I decided to fly there, rent a car, and drive across the state to the conference. This would allow me to visit Milledgeville, pilgrim-like, I confess, on the way down. I'd been reading O'Connor since my freshman year in college. And from the beginning, I was impressed by the way she could capture the dialogue and dialects I'd heard throughout my childhood. At Roberts Wesleyan by 2010, I'd been teaching O'Connor's novels and short stories in my introduction to literature classes for about a decade. Throughout these years, I knew of Andalusia through descriptions and pictures, and to some extent, through memories of my own childhood. But visiting the place proved qualitatively different and lovely. At that time, Andalusia was relatively difficult to find. As I approached Milledgeville in my rented subcompact, I noticed an O'Connor Drive. No apostrophe, small c, E rather than O. Could this be it? Just as I was about to turn around and check, I saw another sign. Andalusia Farm, home of Flannery O'Connor, next right. Once on the gravel driveway, I had to go under a canopy of trees, over a cattle guard, and through a rusted metal gate before I could catch sight of the house, the yard, and the outbuildings that were so familiar to me from photographs. The farmhouse had a brand new red metal roof, but other buildings, including the dairy barn and the hill house, were either in moderate or perilous disrepair. Yet O'Connor's bedroom, where she wrote every morning, and the parlor where she received guests were on display for pilgrims like me. Regina's bedroom was being used as an office and the kitchen as a bookshop. Just behind the farmhouse, the nail house had collapsed in on itself, and a fig tree was growing luxuriantly next to it. Ah, I thought, this is Uncle Lewis's fig tree, and it's much more lush for the absence of free-roaming peacocks. Here also were the water tower, the machine shed, the milk house, the dairy barn, and even the Letts mill. Moment number 1. Andalusia was and is an oasis of green. This is more apparent each time I go back. Crowded by big box stores, strip malls, hotels, car dealerships, convenience stores, and restaurants, Andalusia is a piece of Georgia countryside from several decades ago. And since little of its acreage is now being used for pasture or for the growing of hay, it is slowly reverting to forest. Let me pause to dwell on this. Regardless of one's opinions on O'Connor's fiction, lectures, or correspondence, regardless of one's thoughts on O'Connor's responses to the issues of her day, Andalusia Farm is a 544-acre preserve on the northern outskirts of Milledgeville's suburban crawl. It has been set aside solely because O'Connor lived and wrote there. If she hadn't, it would without a doubt have been devoured by now. Those who have never read O'Connor's work can go to Andalusia to walk on its trails or simply to retreat from the ubiquitous pavement, concrete, noise, heat, and blowing roadside trash of a rapidly expanding southern town. Andalusia is thus a gift to everyone, to literary and spiritual pilgrims like me, to locals who crave a peaceful wooded trail, and not least, to animals, plants, and birds that need room just to live. Perhaps you've watched the film adaptation, The Displaced Person, which was shot at Andalusia in the mid-1970s. In this film, have you ever noticed how loud the birds in the background are? Wild birds, not just peacocks, actually compete with the actors' voices at times. They are that loud. O'Connor often joked about Milledgeville's being designated a bird sanctuary. It had been so dubbed by the Milledgeville City Council in 1934. O'Connor was chuckling, of course, at the unintended double entendres. Yet if you listen carefully in that film, you can register the extent to which a bird sanctuary literally applies as well. In the mid-1970s, the area surrounding Andalusia was still undeveloped enough to attract scores of migratory birds, in addition to providing space for O'Connor's remaining peacocks. Though the property is now rimmed by development, Andalusia remains a gift, a 544-carat gift. Part 2, the ledger. During my visit in 2010, I never could have looked at the farm ledgers, and the Andalusia Interpretive Center's opening up these account books and other artifacts to scholars is a welcome development. The ledgers in particular are key sources of information about the O'Connors' everyday lives at the farm. My research at the NEH Summer Institute focused on Andalusia's farm machinery. I'd settled on this topic so as to complement the extraordinary work being done by Carol Schloss, whose emphasis is more on the farm's human relationships. As I paged through the ledgers, I immediately began to run up against the gaps in our collective knowledge. Moment number 2. As of June 2023, there were still some basic questions about the O'Connor's material life at Andalusia that had never been asked or answered in the biographical or critical literature. I was stunned. Despite 70+ years of criticism on O'Connor's fiction and several decades of exploration, authorized and unauthorized, on our biography, there were some basic matters of fact that neither Andalusia's museum staff, nor the seasoned librarians at Georgia College, nor the microfilms of the Baldwin County Union Recorder, nor Google, nor even Bob Donahue and Bruce Gentry could answer. What was W.E. Bass? Who owned Milledgeville Tractor and Implement Company? Where on the map were these businesses located? What services did they offer? What kinds of equipment did they sell? Perhaps it's difficult for non-scholars to grasp the rush that stumbling upon such questions generates. After the initial perplexity, my feeling was perhaps akin to that of Thoreau's at being lost in the woods. It is a surprising and memorable as well as valuable experience to be lost in the woods anytime, says Thoreau in Walden. Since I did my archival research in the final weeks of the 2023 Summer Institute, I had limited time to find answers. Eventually, I met Joe Duckworth, owner of Duckworth Farm Supply, who could shed some light on these puzzles. In the mid-20th century, W.E. Bass was Milledgeville's John Deere dealer. His business was located on the south side of what is now Floyd L. Griffin Jr. Street, where a parking garage now stands. About Milledgeville Tractor, Joe's memory was less exact. Was this the dealership owned by Homer Shy? Was it the one across from Kirkpatrick's Bakery that sold Farmall? And then, Jordan, can you show us the map here? Got a slide here. That might.
Tim, I'm on a different computer, and so it's now asking me like security permissions.
Okay.
Give it a second.
Let me see if I can do it.
I can make you co-host and you could be able to share.
I got to bring it up first, but
Sorry about that.
that's all right. I think I can probably do it. Let's see. Whoops. Okay, here we go. Yeah, here we go. Okay. Here. Okay. Almost. You know what? Let's see. Bring this up on my machine. This really is an exciting slide, guys, so it's worth the wait. Here we go. Yay. All right. Let's see. How do I make this like this?
Like under, never mind.
There we go. Okay. So as you can see here, the locations of mid-20th century farm equipment dealers imposed on a 2024 map of downtown Milledgeville. For those of you who are in the NEH Summer Institute, here's our beloved Bell Hall. So you can see the W. Bass was just a hop and a skip. It's across from what is now the police department. And then the International Harvester Milledgeville Tractor and Implement Company was here, which is across from the church, the Presbyterian Church, and then St. Stephen's Episcopal Church is right there as well. So I'm going to leave this up just for a minute. All right, sorry about the technical difficulties there. I'll get back to the paper here. More digging in the next few months with the help of Bruce Gentry, who now knows as much about the history of Milledgeville farm equipment dealers as any other O'Connor scholar. Let's hear it for Bruce. Confirmed these details and added more. Yes, W.E. Bass, W stands for Wesley, was the John Deere dealer. Yes, it was on the south side of East McIntosh Street. Yes, Homer Shy, who lived in the yellow brick house across from what is now Georgia College's Maxwell Student Union, owned Milledgeville Tractor and Implement Company. Yes, Milledgeville Tractor and Implement was on South Wayne Street across from the First Presbyterian Church, and yes, it specialized in farmall or international harvester. Why are details like this important? I wish I had an hour to fully explain. Suffice it to say that for a writer like O'Connor, who accepted the designation Christian realist, details matter. I'll take this down now. Okay, about a year after her settling in Andalusia, O'Connor took up oil painting. Her paintings, like the cartoons of her undergraduate years, are often stylized and sometimes lean toward expressionism. But there's an important sense in which O'Connor is always painting from life. Setting the farm ledgers against the stories allows us to affirm O'Connor's respect for physical details, her insistence on portraying matters as they presented themselves to her. The ledger's value as interpretive tools became instantly apparent to me as I studied the two texts of the displaced person this past summer. Though no manuscripts of this story survive, it exists in two published versions, which I will call DP1 and DP2. O'Connor's letters, especially those to the Brainerd Cheneys, reveal that she wrote several intermediate drafts of this story. The initial version, likely ready by December of 1953, focuses on Mrs. Shortley's reversal. Structurally, it resembles other early stories like A Good Man is Hard to Find and A Late Encounter with the Enemy. The revised version, almost 3 times as long as its predecessor, took final form by December of 1954. The first section of DP2 hews fairly close to DP1, yet DP2 features a few important additions, the most prominent of which involve the peacock and the judge. Besides these major changes, O'Connor made several minor ones that, though easy to miss, are key to the unfolding of her more complex plot. One such involves a tractor. Here I have my other slide that I need to show you. Okay. See if I can page down here. There we go. Okay. A relevant sentence in DP1 reads as follows. Mrs. McIntyre bought a new drag harrow because, she said, for the first time she had somebody who could handle machinery. The corresponding sentence in DP2 begins after a break in the text and reads, Mrs. McIntyre bought a new drag harrow and a tractor with a power lift. Because, she said, for the first time she had someone who could handle machinery. As with the other elements new to the revised piece, O'Connor here introduces a plot element that will play a decisive role in her expanded story. Just as Mr. Guizak's ignoring the South's written and unwritten laws about racial segregation sets him on a collision course, so this mention of a tractor with a power lift hints that this machine will be important in the story's unfolding action. To bring this discussion back to the farm ledgers, does it matter that in March of 1952, the O'Connors purchased a lightly used Ferguson tractor and equipment from the Milledgeville Tractor and Implement Company, making a down payment and then paying the balance with a loan from the local Merchants and Farmers Bank? I feel that this is a crucial fact. Though O'Connor sometimes claimed to be oblivious to the farm's operations, she could not have missed the entrance of a shiny gray tractor with a power lift, that is a Ferguson with a hydraulic 3-point hitch, to Andalusia in March of 1952. And her fiction shows that she was noticing how cutting-edge machines such as this can alter human relationships. Part 3, the lens. For several years, I've known that the passage from Joy Holga's book that befuddles Mrs. Hopewell in Good Country People is a direct quotation from a book by Martin Heidegger that was in O'Connor's personal library. What I didn't know until last summer was why she would have been reading this important but abstruse German philosopher. Why would someone whose fiction privileges the uneducated and plain-spoken be inclined to pick up a book like Existence and Being? My query was answered as soon as I began reading O'Connor's copy of this volume in the Inna Dillard Russell Library's Special Collections. The first page of the introductory section, titled A Brief Outline of the Career of M. Heidegger by Werner Brack, communicates the following. Martin Heidegger, born at Messkirk in the Black Forest in 1889, and as a Roman Catholic, well acquainted with Thomistic thought from his early youth onwards, received his first philosophic training in the Neo-Kantian school of Windelband and Rickert. Heidegger's first published work, his thesis for the lectureship, dealt with Duns Scotus's doctrine of categories and of concepts, with the outlook of that medieval thinker whom Windelband appraised as the most acute and most profound of all. End quote there. Moment number 3. Given what we know about O'Connor, it makes perfect sense that she would be curious about the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. In her first letters to Betty Hester, O'Connor writes that she is a Roman Catholic peculiarly possessed of the modern consciousness, who writes to an audience who believe that God is dead. Thus, Heidegger, a Catholic who has rejected the faith but who remains in some ways haunted by it, is not simply an obstacle to be cleared. He is a thinker with whom to converse. Recent scholarship, such as Calvin Kuhn's article, Knowing Nothing of Nothing, The Subversion of Goethe in Good Country People, nice article, Calvin, illustrates that O'Connor's fiction reveals that she had absorbed quite a bit of existence and being, including much of Braque's 100-plus page introduction summary of Being and Time. And though O'Connor could not have read Heidegger's 1953 lecture, The Question Concerning Technology, since this piece was first translated into English only in the 1970s, she could have grasped some of its substance from the book she had. In addition to Braque's wide-ranging general introduction, one of Heidegger's main points in The Question Concerning Technology is summarized in an ad on Existence and Being's dust jacket. This ad promotes a book by Friedrich George Junger entitled The Failure of Technology, Perfection Without Purpose. The idea here is that technology encourages a goalless striving after productivity. In Thoreau's words, technology seeks to construct a telegraph cable between Maine and Texas without first asking if Maine and Texas have anything to communicate. O'Connor's encounter with Martin Heidegger is key to grasping the full import of stories such as The Displaced Person and Good Country People. These stories are powerful partly due to O'Connor's viewing her surroundings through Heideggerian questions, such as how speech connects us to truth or separates us from it, and how technology changes human economies. And I can testify that O'Connor improves on the original. The Displaced Person is much more interesting than What is Metaphysics?
Okay, thank you very much, Tim. We've got plenty of time for people to ask questions. You can wave your hand about or type something in the chat. I do want to well, at least I don't know if you have any more comments to make, Heidi Johnson, about this, but you just read a letter by Flannery in which she said that Andalusia was hit by a twister, not until 1957, but oh, how appropriate for tonight's discussion.
She did also mention that the barn roof was quite damaged, I think even taken off, but luckily insurance covered it. And so she said since it was already in a dilapidated state, they kind of made out okay on the whole deal. So
I didn't know that. That's cool. Okay. Okay, Jordan has a question for Ashley.
Ashley, I enjoyed your presentation, and I'm curious, you were talking about sort of the farm influencer, the rise of the farm influencer culture. I didn't know if you've seen a lot about sort of the trad wife sort of influence coming up, and it seems like there'd be a lot of overlap with that. We actually recently hired someone at Georgia College And you kind of learn anecdotally about sort of what happens to families when that idea goes wrong.
Yeah, I think that's been on my mind too. I think they definitely, the farm influencer and the trad wife kind of movement, I think they go hand in hand, for sure. And like you were saying, it can be very dangerous when a woman is completely dependent on their spouse's income, right? So I think it's a lifestyle, right? It makes sense for some people for sure. And I don't want to like bash that or anything. I definitely think that is a way to go if it works for you. But again, I think it's good to be like aware of like when that can go awry. But yeah, I see it, it's just so it's almost like they're creating this mythology, this like new mythology, like returning back to how things were, but then not thinking about, well, things back then wasn't women couldn't have credit cards, like, okay, you like the fashion, you like the recipes, you like, doing like the homesteading and the canning, that's great. But you're just putting forth this kind of image that isn't always aware of the privilege that comes with that, like being able to do that labor, and also coming across in this sort of time frame where we didn't have like rights, we couldn't have credit cards, we couldn't own property, we couldn't sign on things without our husband's signature, and so I think it's just really concerning looking at like current legislation and what's coming down. I feel like it's all connected. And I think it's just something to be aware of and cognizant, and especially with influencers of any kind, to always have a critical lens. Like, what are y'all trying to sell me? What are you trying to show me? To just always kind of have a critical eye to that as well. Again, I don't want to down that either, because that is a way you can garner income. But I think it's just always good to be critical. Yeah, but yeah, I definitely see those going hand in hand. There's a big influencer, I think she's I think Nora Smith or something, and she's really known for making recipes from scratch, like she makes the scratch from scratch, like she made bubble gum one day, and so but it's just thinking about the time, like, and the childcare and all these things that you have to have in order to be able to do that successfully. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Calvin Kuhn.
Hi, this is for Ashley, but I think also maybe Tim, you can speak to it a little as well. But Ashley, maybe this is a way to kind of connect what you said about you're looking at the carceral logics and O'Connor's work and then also the farm. And as you were talking and about, especially with the influencers, I was thinking just about the different kind of valences of farm. You have like the antebellum plantation, and then what Sylvia Winter calls the plot, kind of this leftover land on the plantation that was given to enslaved persons to feed themselves, but then it became a site of culture, right? And so she's looking at the plot in the plantation. There's also, I don't remember in what essay, but Wendell Berry kind of says his ideal farmer and what he sees as the closest to the ideal is the Depression era farmer and living on thrift and kind of reusing it in kind of this small scale way. And then what you're talking about, this shift to in the mid-century to CAFOs or CAFOs, and then kind of this indeterminate, what kind of farm is this going to be, return to the land. I think there's this hope that it's some kind of homesteading, kind of small scale. And then of course out here in Arizona, there's a lot more kind of this tension between like indigenous desert farming and kind of European desert farming and ranching that comes together. So there's all of those different things. But I was thinking about kind of in what ways any of these different farms, maybe especially these mid-century on concentrated feeding operations, operate as with a carceral logic and as a form of incarceration, whether that's for laborers and especially the way that a lot of farm laborers now are talked about, especially ones that immigrate from Latin America. There's that, illegal is attached in a way that's carceral, but also the animals themselves are incarcerated. Like there was that Supreme Court case where California said you can't sell pork in California if your pigs don't have 24 square feet of space, right? And that mirrors a lot of talk about like welfare of people who are incarcerated, like how much time outside do you get, how much social time, how much time talking to your family, whatever. So yeah, I wonder if there's a way, and I was thinking about this maybe with yours, Tim, and kind of maybe the aesthetics of a ledger book and the squares and the lines and all of that, and how that seems, at least to me, a mismatch with the way animals actually behave. So yeah, I wonder if you can comment on if there's kind of in O'Connor a carceral farming logic that you've picked up on specifically.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this so much because I've struggled with making that connection with the carceral and the farm. In my carceral paper, I'm looking more of like the absence, because I think absence is always important. Like she speaks of jails and prisons and even the state hospital in passing or just very briefly. So I think that absence is really profound, especially considering she is surrounded by carceral spaces, right? Her university was a carceral space at one point. So that's kind of where I go with that. But I like thinking of the farm too as a carceral space as well. And like what you were saying, with people, like I'm thinking even in more localized, what there is a farm here that uses a lot of Hispanic workers, right? And it's not my business what their legal status is, but I think they are kind of in a way held in like a suspended status, right? Where that farmer who is over them has a lot of control and power over their livelihood, of course, but also of their legal status and their immigration. So again, that creates a kind of carceral space. I like looking at it through the animal studies lens too, thinking of the animals like being penned up. I also, while you were talking, we have a lot of chicken barns here, and just thinking, I've been thinking about prison and just the geography, because I had a job interview at a prison last week, and it totally looked different than the prison I'm used to in Alabama, because when you pull up to the one in Alabama, you're just seeing the front and then it just goes back. So you don't see how massive this structure is. But at this one in Tennessee, you see everything when you pull up, and it's just huge, and there's so much razor wire. I see chicken barns, not to equate like people in prison with chickens at all, but like the structure and how they go back and just how huge and how much space they take up and the impact on the land. I think they look carceral, and they are carceral for the poultry there. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of connections to be made. So I'm glad that you got my brain ticking on that. So
I'll just jump in quickly. Yeah, it's a good question, Calvin. And, farms shouldn't be carceral spaces. Farms should be open spaces. And, I think the problem these days is that farming is all about making money. And you have these big industrial farms, and then you have to have laborers to work on these essentially factory floors, right? And, but, I haven't really thought about this with relationship to the O'Connors, so I'm just going to not say anything about that. But I mean, you mentioned Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry celebrates, I think, farming as anti-carceral. Farming is something that's really liberating and beautiful. And I haven't thought about O'Connor's, what she says, if she says anything about that. But anyway, it's an interesting question. Heidi, you asked about were the O'Connors John Deere people or International Harvester people? Well, so they bought all of their farm equipment used, almost all. I mean, they bought a hay baler new, they bought a cultipacker. Sounds horrible these days, because what you're doing is you're packing the dirt down and, tilling, cultivating and packing the dirt at the same time. But anyway, so they bought a few things new, but generally they would buy their equipment used. And generally Uncle Lewis is the one who did the purchasing. Regina did the bookkeeping, and Uncle Lewis, he worked at a hardware store. He was kind of a handy person, and he did the purchasing. And, we don't have any real indication about how they ended up with a Ferguson. My thought was, this was a cutting edge. I can show you because I used this in my presentation for the NEH. Let me just show you a picture. Okay, share my screen here. Okay, so this was the tractor pretty much. I mean, this is a TE20, and they probably had a TE30. There are user's manuals for TE20 and TE30, and the TE30 has a bunch of other manuals for attachments. So I think what happened was Lewis probably he probably asked for, or through mail or something, got the manual for a TE20, looked at it, realized this is the machine to have, and then talked with the local dealers. And as I was talking to Joe Duckworth at Duckworth Farm Supply, he said the closest Ferguson dealer was in, is it Sandersville? Is that right? Is there Sandersville, Sanderson? He said Sandersville. I think that was the closest Ferguson dealer, but it was used. So it's like buying a Ford on a Chevy lot, or a Chevy on a Honda lot, or something like that, that they bought this almost new, but it was used. And the 3-point hitch was this Harry Ferguson was a British engineer who patented the 3-point hitch. And essentially what that does is it takes the weight off of the wheels and sort of puts it on the implement. So you get much more traction and much more power when you're trying to do whatever with an attachment. So yeah, this is what they had here. And so were they John Deere? They also had a John Deere. It was an old one. It broke down. There's something in Brad Gooch's biography about Jan Matisiak fixing the John Deere. Regina didn't think he could do it, but he did it. And then they had another tractor besides that. So the other thing I was going to bring in was, in A Circle in the Fire, there's a little line about these unruly boys from the city let the oil out of all 3 tractors, and it's like, at that moment, there were 3 tractors on Andalusia Farm. I just think that's so cool that, those kinds of details that you can glean from a farm ledger are, I'll take this down. Those kind of details that you can glean from a farm ledger are, they work their way into the stories in interesting ways.
Okay. Well, okay, I'll ask a basic question of the two of you, having thought about this for months now. Did Flannery like living on a farm, or did she hate it? What do you think?
Oh God, I've thought of that. I feel like I can't answer it without putting my own personal interference, like it is a love. I wouldn't say hate, but frustration, a love frustration. And I don't know if it seems, she had the birds, she had the animals, she loved having us. I feel like that space to have those animals and to care for them. So she couldn't have hated it all the way, because she loved her animals and her birds there. So maybe the birds are kind of the backbone of her love for the farm.
Well, in the beginning of her career, she moved to New York City, and she thought that's where she needed to be, because all writers lived in New York City, right? And then she got ill with lupus, and she had to come home. I think the farm was where she got her material. It's not the only place, but you read a story like The Displaced Person, or A Circle in the Fire, or Greenleaf, and you see that's exactly what she's writing about. And so I think it was really a gift to her that she, all things considered, as an artist, I guess I can say that she had to move back to the farm. And, hey, it's a beautiful place. It's really beautiful. So has that going for it too.
Okay, thank you. That's a question I've been puzzling over for the last 20 years, knowing nothing about farms, but and I'm making no progress. I mean, I don't know how she felt about it. Your answers about what she loved don't exactly prove that she loves modern American farming in her time. She could hate a whole lot of it and still get fiction out of it and still find a place for birds and say, well, at least I've got that. Okay, there's my little editorial comment that I have no business making. What else, folks?
Hey, Bruce, this is Craig. I sent a chat to everyone. We had Carol Schloss as one of our Osher O'Connor guest scholars Monday, the 29th, I think it was. She kind of talked about, she titled her presentation Flannery O'Connor Settling In. And so she talked about Flannery evolving into the writer living there now with Regina in Milledgeville. And she took 3 stories, The River, The Life You Save May Be Your Own, and The Displaced Person, and talked about how each of them reflected different facets of what Flannery was reviewing as she continued to live under Regina's care. So I put the link in the chat in case
Thank you.
people
Somehow I missed that. Yeah.
just sent it over.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it's kind of it extends what she talked about in her public lecture at NEH.
Uh-huh.
I think it's another chapter in her book.
Right. Okay, well, maybe, we're just about out of time. I should mention before we go, besides, thank you very much for the talks, which raising a lot of interesting points, that the new Andalusia Interpretive Center will be open a lot during the upcoming conference. It's all ready to go. It's all ready to be visited by those of you who haven't been here for a while. I think you will be very surprised by the great many changes and what a difference it makes to have the interpretive center there. And I'm promised that it will be open all the time during the 12, 13, 14, 15 period in September. And we're going to have some events out at the farm. And so, hey, I hope we have quite a few papers about Andalusia for the conference. And anybody who's got an idea they want to talk about in September, just send that right on to me. You've just got a few days to get it together. Ashley's promising to send me a proposal. Good. Thank you. Okay. Keep in touch, folks. We'll be back in August with more. And thank you all for attending. It's nice to see all those boxes on the Zoom screen. And now whoever knows how to turn this thing off, I guess.
Got it, Bruce.
You can't.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night, all.